Paulina.
Hey Megan!
What book are we going to talk about today?
Today we're going to talk about The Whole Picture, the colonial story of the art in our museums and why we need to talk about it by Alice Proctor.
Excellent. Do you want to give
Yeah,
us a small summary of this book?
sure. This book goes through a few different examples of existing museums and discusses their history and origin and current practice as a reproduction of colonialism, which sounds ever so exciting, and I promise it is a lot more than that. However, it is a really great book to fit into our of Mycenaean Men book club theme of what is the impact of archaeological data in modern human society, because it really explores how archaeological artifacts and the way that they're arranged and cared for in modern contexts impacts how we understand a lot of those things today. Um, Thinking back on when you were reading the book, Megan, what was one cool thing that you learned from the book?
Well, I discovered a museum that I had never been to before. And this was the Soane Museum in London. It's a house museum. And it was originally obviously someone's home, and they founded this museum because of all of the many things that he collected and put into the house. Um, and and I was very interested in it because a lot of the things that he have has a real, like, authentic artifacts, but he also has a ton of casts and things in it because for a period of time he used the house as a school to teach people about art who couldn't travel or go on a grand tour. Um, and going into the museum, because I immediately after I read this I went to the museum, it was every bit as crazy and intense inside as the book portrayed it to be. I spent a good afternoon walking around going, oh no, that's not supposed to be here. Oh god, I can't believe that I'm looking at this. It was a great read and a great afternoon.
Awesome.
um, was there anything about the book that you found particularly interesting?
Yeah, there were lots of different themes in the book that as I was reading through it, I was like, oh my God, this is so awful. But one of the things that I thought was really great about this, there were a couple really great evaluations of modern museum exhibits that I thought were really, really, really well done. Particularly the evaluation of who's deciding to either create a particular set of art or the way in which a particular museum installation is actually done. That can either sort of support the narrative in a way that extends it, but can also be used to kind of undercut that narrative. And there were a couple of different art installation examples that I thought Proctor did a really great job of describing and evaluating in detail. And while they're not, I guess, archaeological in the typical sense or in the typically colonial sense, all of those exhibits had something to do with sort of the material world. The art didn't exist just sort of in this abstract way. And one of them, I believe, was called the Sugar Baby. And that one is very much a both material, but also in some ways archaeological piece in that because I believe it was made of sugar, it was actually deteriorating over time much more rapidly than we would suspect other things. And it also drew from archaeological forms. It had a sphinx-esque design, and it was very much an important point of direct interaction between the public and this physical art piece that was both used and abused, and a important point of discussion for people of different backgrounds, particularly people of different races in America. And I just thought that her discussion of that and the efficacy of the non efficacy of that installation was a really, really important discussion to be having when we're thinking about not only what we choose to put in there, if it's a deluge, and whether or not we should put it in, but also how we allow people of different backgrounds, of different audiences, ages, relationships to artifacts, how we actually choose to either allow or encourage or discourage and remove them from certain kinds of objects or places. Based on your reading of the book, how do you feel that the book fits the theme? What is the impact of archaeological data in on modern human society?
Because this book addresses colonialism both directly and indirectly, I think that it's a good book to read to understand the ways that these direct and indirect influences impact us, and the way that archaeology is impacted by these intentional and unintentional and perceived and non-perceived issues of colonialism and violence, and the way that this pursuit of colony, this pursuit of power, has created so much violence, and the way that we've then, as a society, transformed that act of violence into an act of acquisition and education, and it made me think a lot about the purpose of museums and whether or not we should have museums. And obviously, as someone who's in archaeology and heritage, that's a big scary question to be asking yourself. Should we have
Mm-hmm.
museums?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know that I have developed an answer to that question, but I appreciated uh, that the author created a book that provoked that question in
Yeah.
me. Um, because as archaeologists, we can get quite jaded about things. So
Mm-hmm.
it's good to get poked a little bit and have to think about whether your profession should actually exist.
Yeah, I agree with that. It's a really important one to consider, particularly as we look towards, can institutions born directly of colonialism, can acts of inquiry born directly out of colonialism continue to exist in a serviceable way in a decolonial framework or an uncolonizing framework.
Yeah.
So
Is all knowledge gained through colonial practices inherently unethical for that it's a big thing.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
yeah.
For people who enjoyed or had their thoughts provoked by this book, are there any other works that you would recommend to them?
Well, obviously, I would recommend if you're in London, going to the Soane Museum. It is free, and I cannot overstate how bizarre an experience it really was.
If you liked the whole picture, kind of extending what Megan was saying about visiting one of the collections, I highly recommend the artistic work by Nicholas Galanin. He is an Indigenous creator who creates in a bunch of different mediums. I actually have a print of one of his works here in my home. It's a half Princess Leia, half Hopi femme with the traditional hair whirls kind of pushed together to see where the influence from Leia comes from and indigenous style. And just his work in general is really, really fascinating. If you're looking for something that is fiction that explores colonialism in a really deep way and kind of both captures the sort of alienating society level issues with colonialism, but also sort of the personal way that people can sometimes almost colonize themselves, I would highly recommend the Ancillary series by Anne Leckie. Particularly Ancillary Justice is the first book, and it talks about basically an intergalactic colonizing force that not only spreads its own culture, it actually, in fact, literally colonizes the people by replacing them with a united AI. And it's a fascinating book, exceptionally well written, and I absolutely love the entire series. And it's a great exploration of a variety of different issues in culture in general, and also encapsulates a really great portrayal of space that is actually as diverse as we even see just people on Earth. So I highly recommend that series if you're interested in exploring the colonial aspect of this book. If you're looking for a song to kind of set the mood, one song that I think kind of fits this vibe is called The Keepers by Santa Gold. There's just something about it and the name of the song that really makes me feel or makes me think about how museum is kind of gatekeepers and but sometimes shepherds depending on the context and whose heritage they're working with. But that's just one song that I could recommend for a sort of background track for this. With that, do you have any concluding thoughts, Megan?
So another series thinking about fiction books are the books by Arcady Martine. These deal with colonialism and empire and Mesoamericans in space, um, and they're sort of crime noirish novels, but they have to do a lot with hierarchy and class and drawing parallels between modern capitalists' systems of hierarchy and ceremonial systems of hierarchy within Maya and Aztecs peoples pre contact, and the way that colonial incidents between these people in space and outsiders, the way they're handled by the society and the way that things can go right and can go wrong. And they're very archaeological in terms of you can actually learn quite a bit about Mesoamerica from them, but also in space. So yeah, they're fun books. Memory Called Empire and A Desolation Called Peace are the two that are out right now. So um, do you have anything you want to add, Paulina?
No, I think I'm good. So thank you, Megan, for joining me to talk about the whole picture. I hope now our listeners have also a piece of that whole picture and are excited to read about the book.